Alrighty, welcome back to the Defying Gravity podcast with Zach Goodman. Today we are going to talk about the max effort method. Okay, um, I'm most kind of known for using the brief maximal tension method. Some people don't know the difference, some people do. But today I'm going to talk about the max effort method, how I'm using it, my kind of transition to the brief maximal tension method, and how I'm still using max effort in my athletes programming. Okay, um, so I think we got to start kind of from the beginning on where and kind of how I transitioned to what I'm doing now. Okay. So originally with my athletes, I was using kind of a West Side template, I guess you can say. So the max effort upper, max effort lower, 2 dynamic days, right? That's kind of where I started as far as the strength work go, and I was subbing in, using in jumping and things like that as well in there, as well as sprinting. Okay, so I was kind of using the skeleton of the West Side template that everybody is kind of, knows about, that's kind of popularized, right? That upper, lower, speed days and max days, okay, along with repetition effort every day. So that's kind of originally where I started from, and that's kind of what I use for a lot of my athletes, okay? And it was relatively effective, okay? I made kids got stronger, okay? It was a good way to train. It was something that when I first got to the school that I'm at now, it was a lot different than what was previously being done. So it was a good kind of change of pace for the kids that were already there, already lifting. Okay. So that's kind of where I originally started at, and it's quite a bit different than what I'm doing now. Okay. Um, so kind of my first, I guess, transition away from maybe the traditional, what we know currently, as far as West Side template go with the max effort singles on the max days. Um, I ended up moving more towards threes and fives. So one of the first pitfalls that I found with the max effort method originally was that my athletes were not getting enough practice per se, and they were not getting enough volume to really change and get that much stronger, right? They were getting stronger, but they weren't getting enough reps. Okay. So they weren't getting enough stimulating reps. So it didn't seem like their lifts were moving as fast. Okay. So what I was doing was originally is I was only using the singles probably once every other week. I was starting to rotate in a lot more threes and fives. I originally started with the bench doing that because I noticed that my athletes were super weak and we needed a lot more volume. That was one of the biggest things I noticed with the young kids that they just have no muscle mass in their upper body. So originally I was using a lot of threes and fives, especially on the incline bench. So what I was doing was when I originally started, when I was using this, 3 week wave cycle with the West Side template, um, I think I had a close grip max day, right? Or no, I had a regular max bench day. I had an incline bench in the second week, and I think I was either using a close grip. I think I was using a close grip bench on that next day, or I was using some sort of pause bench. I can't remember exactly what I was doing on the third week, and then I would just repeat all of it again. But I started to notice that the threes and fives tend to be more productive. So it seemed like when I gave them a heavy set of a heavy triple or heavy five, it seemed like we just got more out of that. And so I started to move more towards threes and fives on the squats as well. Never really the deadlifts, but the squats, I started to use more threes and fives. So I started to kind of move away a little bit from those singles on those max days. Okay. Because I started to see what was happening was is that they would work up to a weight on a single and they would either miss it or get it, right? Just like it's just like every other max, you either miss it or you get it. But there was never really a grind, right? It wasn't like they were grinding and missing, they just would miss it. Okay. And so they just didn't have that next gear. And so they weren't really getting anything stimulating out of reps that were super heavy. They were pretty much working up, maxing, and they would just boom, boom, boom every single rep. Then they would get up to that next weight that was heavy that they really should strain against. And it was pretty much just, just stop. There would be no movement. Really wouldn't be much of a strain because their nervous system just didn't know how to call on enough motor units to complete the task at that time, because they're all new lifting, right? They don't really know how to tap in to those high threshold motor units yet. So again, I started to realize that if we use threes and fives, they were tended to be able to strain against multiple reps in a set, right? So they would take out like a 3 rep max, okay? Maybe it's 90% or something like that of their, I don't know, whatever percent you want to put on there. But say a 3 rep max, 90%, right? They were able to get that first rep pretty good, but a little challenging. Second rep was real challenging. They were able to get it. And that third rep was that really, really hard grind, right? But I started to notice they had a few reps before that last rep. They tended to grind better on that last one. Okay. And so what was actually happening is that they were just recruiting a little bit more motor units kind of in a sequence, and so they had access to more on that last rep, so they're able to push and reach that high threshold motor units that we're trying to discharge. Okay, so you're almost fatiguing in a way, But really what you were doing was you were just sequentially getting and adding more and more fibers to eventually get that last rep. Okay. And so what I noticed was that we're able to actually get 3 stimulating reps in a set rather than just, one, or maybe not even getting a stimulating rep if they don't even know how to grind yet. So I started to move a lot towards the 3s and 5s in the bench. I think a lot of people that are still using this kind of West Side template as far as their like skeleton goes for strength training, they learn pretty quickly that the kids, especially the high school athletes, they need 3s and 5s a lot more than singles on the bench. And if you are going to use singles, I'll talk about this in a bit, but it seems a lot of, you start to figure out you need back down sets, you need something, some sort of supplement of bench to get more reps in, more stimulating reps. And so anyone that pays attention understands kanji, like they're all doing that. But I realized if we were able to do 3s and 5s, well, shit, we could do multiple sets of 3s and 5s. So what I was doing was I was like, okay, if we could work up to a 3 or 5 rep max, what tended to happen was this. They would work up to a 3 rep max, right? It would be really grindy. They would get it. We would add 5 more pounds to see if they get it in. And then they would get it again, but they'd be 5 more pounds. And it looked the exact same. So what I started to realize was, okay, these athletes are so undertrained that they can actually get multiple sets of stimulating reps without being completely burnt, right? Whereas like someone like me, or maybe if you're a strength coach that's been training, like someone that's been training a long time, or someone that's just gotten strong before, you know that one top set is really going to do you in, right? Like you're not going to be able to repeat that one max effort at one max effort triple at 5, like you're gassed, right? And then you kind of, maybe you do back down sets to accumulate more volume. Maybe you just go to a supplemental lift, whatever that looks like for you. But if you're lifting maximal weights, right, and you're actually strong, you pretty much can only lift maximal weights for that 3 or 5 max basically one time. Okay. And then after that, you kind of start to get gassed and you can't replicate that. And then you have to use other methods to kind of move forward. Okay. What I realized with the young kids is they were able to get multiple sets of 3s and 5s. So I was able to grind them for triple, take some rest, grind them again for another triple. So we were able just to accumulate a few more sets of stimulating reps. And so what that turned into was strength gains like crazy, right? Instead of getting maybe 5 or 10 pounds every 3-week rotation on an exercise, we were getting like 20 or more, especially on the squat. The squat went nuts when I started doing this. So I started to realize the strength gains went up really, really fast. Okay. And so I realized I'm like, okay, so we can get multiple sets of these 3 to 5s and they're super stimulating, right? And so right around the time that I was figuring this out, most of my athletes were, it was like the fall time. So a lot of them were like in season and things like that. So what we did was, because I had them 2 days a week. Okay. And so this is kind of right when I started to transition my system more towards what I'm doing now. I only had them in the weight room 2 days a week. So generally I have them 4. So I was giving them like 2 max effort days, 2 dynamic effort days. I shifted that dynamic effort day because kids didn't understand how to do speed work and I couldn't like teach them that feel yet because they were still so new to moving a barbell. I just started giving them rep work instead. So I basically turned into like a 5x5 day or a 6x6 day. It was pretty, typical like West Side suggests that. And it was something that was easy, kind of plug and play. So we basically had a max day and a rep day, and the rep day was really productive. I added that, and then I started using my max day, and I started giving them heavy 3s and 5s with less sets. But then the rep day on that dynamic effort day, they would get more reps, and so that worked pretty good. With in season hit, and so I'm trying to figure out. Originally, I'm trying to figure out. Okay, I want to keep them strong, and we need to keep getting stronger. Okay. But I can't give them the same amount of volume that I was giving them before. I need to figure out some sort of way to just to make them stronger or at least not make them weaker. That was my original thought when I first kind of had these kids in season, had a large group of athletes that were in season. Okay. And so I started I started rotating between like, okay, on this week, we're going to do a max effort upper and then a rep lower, and then we'll rotate the next week. And so I kind of, it just made sense, right? So then in 2 weeks, we were getting that full week of training that we were getting in the off season. And a lot of coaches still do that, which is fine. But that's kind of where I was at originally. But what I started to realize is what if I just gave them a rep day instead? What if I just gave them some heavy triples or some heavy 5s? But maybe I pulled their sets back a little. Maybe instead of 5 or 6 sets, what if I just gave them 3 sets, right? Because I was worried if I just give them a max day on the bench, right? We know, especially for the bench, it requires volume and frequency, and you can recover relatively fast benching. Okay. So what I started to realize is if I only gave them a max day, like on the week that we did a max effort upper and then we did a rep lower, that max upper just didn't stimulate them enough to really create change for the next week. right? So what I realized is a couple weeks in, I'm like, okay, we're not really getting stronger on the bench. Our upper body strength isn't really going anywhere. I'm like, okay, there's something that needs to change. So why don't I just give them a rep day for the entire season? We'll just use heavy triples and fives, right? And we'll give them enough sets where it doesn't burn them, not 5 or 6, like, 2, 3, 4 sets at the very most. Okay. And we were still backing on accessory work a little bit at that point just because I didn't have the time. And so what I started to realize is their bench, especially their bench, but really their squat too, it pretty much moved the exact same as when I had them in the off season. And I'm like, what the fuck? Like, why are we doing so little? But it's moving, the numbers are moving the same. So there's something wrong. Okay. There's something that's not right. And so I started to figure out, okay, triples and fives really move the needle with these kids' strength. Okay. Singles, I'm not getting as much out of. And I hate that because I love the max effort method. I've used it for a long time. Again, Westside has some of the strongest athletes and lifters ever. So I'm like, okay, there's something here that I'm not understanding. Okay. So I started to realize that our in-season numbers and our off-season numbers are pretty much the same, right? We were really getting strong. It wasn't like we were getting weaker. We were still getting strong, but they were moving at the same rate, which shouldn't happen because I'm having less time and I'm only training them 2 days versus 4. So the frequency is down. If anything, they should still be getting stronger. But they should be getting stronger slower. And so talking to some people, talking to a few of my close friends, and just kind of formulating what I thought should happen. I'm like, well, what if as soon as these guys are back, as soon as I have a lot of athletes 4 days a week again, why don't we just go straight into maybe using triples and fives or fours and you kind of using that rep range? Why don't we just use it twice a week instead, right? And then just kind of progress those numbers. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. Like, I'm starting to figure out. It's kind of my first experimentation, I guess, with the brief maximal tension method. And so we go into this offseason, I have them 4 days a week. And so we're using heavy threes, fours, fives, and sixes. We're using those both sessions instead of just like one session a week. And numbers go crazy. And the kids are getting better. It's easier for me to coach. I'm like, okay, I'm on to something here. Okay. I've already completely eliminated dynamic effort, barbell lifts at this point. I'm still doing dumbbell jumps. This is right around the time that I figured out the dumbbell jumps. Because before I've always had a good idea with the strength stuff, but I didn't really understand how the dumbbell jumps would fit in. And then once I figured that out, I'm like, okay, I don't really need to speed squat, or I don't really need to speed deadlift. I'm like, I'm just going to dumbbell jump them, okay, and I'm going to squat them pretty heavy, and we're going to do a supplemental deadlift movement. So that's where I was originally at. And so again, I moved away to dynamic effort for the barbell lifts because the point is rate of force development and the jump is so much faster. And we really weren't getting anything out of those speed squats. Like I literally were not getting anything out of it. Like as soon as I moved to a rep day, numbers shot up. So I was getting nothing out of speed. And I was using the 10, 10 by 2s, 8 by 2, 6. Like I was using all the traditional stuff that I use, band tension, all of it. I was getting basically nothing out of that compared to rep work. So heavy sets of fives or like 5x5s and 4 and stuff like that. I was getting nothing out of that. So I got rid of the speed barbell lifts completely, and just went basically all in with these heavy threes, fours, fives. Okay. But I was still dumbbell jumping and using some other things. Okay. So that's kind of originally where I went to. And then since then, I've just sharpened my system, right? Now I have progressions, I have waves laid out. I have, okay, this kid does this. We need to do this. Like basically, that was kind of where I transitioned from max effort to this brief maximal tension method. I just looked at the numbers, and that's really all you can do as a coach is just look and track the training and just be honest about what you're seeing. Again, it would be really easy for me to be attached to like max effort, right? The kids like it, it's fun, I like it, but we weren't getting as strong doing that versus just doing heavy sets of reps. Okay, so that's kind of where I was at with that. Um, and so this kind of I'm going to jump forward a little bit as far as current uses, like how I'm using max effort now. Okay, because I am still using max effort. Okay, it's just not traditionally the way that other people use it. We do still max main lifts. Okay, it's something that I still want to make clear. We're still using singles on main lifts. Okay, we're just not doing that every week. Some people want to call it test weeks or whatever you want to call it. What I end up doing is usually every month, at least once a month, or maybe every 2 months. Okay, generally depends on kind of where the season is. I like to max them on a bench. I like to max them on a box squat. I like to max their deadlifts. I like to max their deadlifts more often, actually. I actually like to max their deadlift about every month. But I like to max them every between 3 and 8 weeks. Okay. With brief maximal tension being the other days there. Okay. Some people want to call it a test or whatever, but to me, it helps me be very clear about where we're at strength wise, right? Like you can have a kid that can do 95% of the 1 rep max for 3, or for 5, but they can't do, 10 more pounds that for a single. So to me, very easy and clear way to test. Okay. The kids really like maxing, obviously, because in their head, they don't necessarily understand conversions and that. Like they don't understand, oh, well, my triple turned into a 5. Like sometimes they don't understand that, but they do know, hey, I did 200 for one, and now I'm doing 240 for one. That's improvement. So it's easy for them to kind of comprehend the progression, which is great. That's fun. Okay. Culture wise, kids love maxing out. Okay. The energy in the weight room is great. So again, I still max them on main lifts right around that time. Supplemental lifts, I max a supplemental lift or a couple of them usually every 3 weeks. Okay. So I said I max the deadlifts basically every third week or maybe at least once a month. Okay. Whether it's a sumo, conventional, or RDL, I like maxing deadlifts. Okay. I don't really necessarily love deadlifting for reps. We'll sometimes use some 5s and some triple, 5s, but usually a lot of our deadlifting is between like triples, doubles, singles. Okay. And multiple sets usually. I've done some top sets that works good, but I'll usually max a supplemental lift. I like maxing chin ups. Chin ups are great to max out on. Love maxing their chin ups. I'll occasionally max out like some other things, like maybe we'll push really hard on the dumbbell bench or the incline bench, or I've actually had some kids max recently, just like some different tricep movements, just to kind of see how that rolls. But I do like maxing supplemental lifts more than main lifts. Okay. But you can either call it a max or a test, whatever you want. But ultimately, it just helps them understand the progress they make. So that's kind of how I'm using it now. Still using brief max potential to kind of drive the needle the most, but I still am maxing out different things. But how I would use it now, like talking about max effort, like I talk to coaches all the time. They're like, well, how would you use max effort, or why did you change? Again, I'm a brief maximal tension guy. That's what I do. But I can see some utility. And here's how if you're a max effort person, if you're someone that has built a culture off of maxing kids, if people actually do that, people have built like literally strength cultures off doing that. I have some good friends that they their max days, their max effort days are like huge at their gym. The kids love them. Okay, they built a culture off maxing. It's a great thing for their program, what they do. Okay. The thing that I would change probably the most is I would probably give them back down sets for sure. So if you're not already using back down sets, if you're just maxing and going to like for example, a bench day, if you're maxing a bench and then you're going to triceps right after or going to dumbbell bench right after, I would probably give them back down sets of whatever they're doing. So if you max them on a close grip, then give them some close grip back down sets or give them some incline back down sets, give them something so they're still accumulating some reps. So I would definitely, lean into back down sets. I don't love build sets. Like I don't love pyramiding up, where you go like, oh, a set of 5 at 80 and then a set of 3 at 90 and then max. I don't really like that because I don't like to pre-fatigue. So I would really lean into back down sets. I also would have a smaller rotation. I was already doing that when I was using max effort. I realized a big rotation takes longer to coach, right? Because you have a lot of kids, you got to teach them all these different movements because they don't have a ton of movement literacy yet. They haven't trained long enough they're not even good at the basic movements. They're not going to understand the variations and even how to set those up. So I already like really shrunk my rotation originally, but that's something I would recommend for all coaches that are using some sort of max effort, rotation scheme. If it was me, I would pick 4 lifts or 3 lifts. You run 3 waves. I would pick like 3 or 4 testers or 3 or 4 like lifts that you want to progress on. So maybe for your bench, maybe it's a regular bench, an incline bench, pause bench, or a close grip, whatever what you want, floor press. Okay. Maybe you have football bars, you want to max that. I would pick 3 to 4 and I would just rotate them every month. So like I would have, close grip, incline, football bar. Next 3 wave test, try to beat that by 5, keep the rotation small. Don't have 10 or 15 different exercises in your library because you really don't want to have a ton of variation, especially for high school athletes. The older they are, the more rotation they're going to want and they're going to need. But if you're training high school athletes, like most of you do, or middle school or whatever, keep a very small rotation, at least originally. Okay. So if I was going to use it now, that's probably how I'd use it. If I was structuring my training the same way I was with the West Side Barbell template being my skeleton and kind of filling stuff in, that's what I would do. But again, max effort is not necessarily, it's not a bad method. It's a great method. It's just for me, training the athletes I train, brief maximal tension has tenfold been better, right? When I actually look at how much stronger and how much faster we're getting, the brief maximal tension method is by far a better method. I mean, we can continually add, especially with new kids, we can put 20 some plus pounds on their bench in 3 weeks. We can put, 20 to 50 on their squat in 3 weeks. Even my older kids, are routinely putting about 20-ish pounds a month to their squat, 10 to 15 or so on their bench, and that's routine every month. Okay. So I have, basically it's pretty routine to add over 100 plus pounds to your lifts in a year. Okay. It's very routine. And so I would never get away from that just because the gains are too consistent and it's easier to coach. Okay. So it's not only more convenient, easier to coach, the gains are better. Okay. Easier to manipulate per kid. Right. So to me, it's a better system the way I had to have it set up compared to what I had set up before. But again, coaches who have still instilled this belief in this method should probably continue using it. Okay. Belief is half of it. And then athletes who need more variation, less volume, probably are going to thrive off some sort of max effort type training. It's low volume, high intensity. You're going to rotate exercise relatively frequently. Okay, brief maximal tension might beat down a more advanced lifter. But if you're an athlete, you're never going to really become an advanced lifter because you're not going to lift enough. Okay, that's just the reality of the situation. You could have a kid that is a 4-year kid with you. He could bench 400 plus pounds, could squat 600 plus pounds, deadlift in the sixes. That kid's still not advanced. He's super young, first of all. Second of all, he's probably not training super intensely every week of the entire year because they're playing a sport or multiple sports. High school kids can never become advanced level lifters. They're just too young. There's not enough time, right? Like there's even the kid that benches 400, his peak might be a 700-pound bench. You don't even know what these kids' peaks are. If you're benching 400 plus in high school, you probably are going to be good for close to 600 at your peak, right? You could be more, who knows? Okay. But they don't have enough time to ever become advanced, so it doesn't even matter. Okay. Some of the stuff we're worried about, I hate that there's like these strawman arguments about training. Just a kind of a side tangent, but like we're so worried about like, oh, what do we do when they become advanced? Is this going to be sustainable when they become advanced? You are never going to have athletes long enough for them to ever be advanced. So stop worrying about advanced methodology and advanced use of programming. Just worry about what is best for them now because nothing is guaranteed. I've had kids that have been my best workers, my best kids for 6 months, a year, and then they disappear for a bit. Okay. What do you do for those kids? Do you just bring them back and keep going? Like you need a methodology that is aggressive enough to get them strong fast so that I always plan for kids to miss time. That's how I coach. I plan for it. So I use a system that I know that could come back. I can get him what most coaches can get him in maybe 6 months. I need to be able to do that in 2 months, right? I need to be able to do a lot more in a lot less time. So I'm going to use the most aggressive and best means of training possible. Even my most advanced, my kids that never miss, that are super consistent, even those kids are still going to have downtime in the year, right? When they go to play football, they go to wrestle, they go to play baseball. Okay. My most consistent kids still have games. They're still going to miss sessions. They're going to have extra practice. We're not going to be able to push them as hard. So, in my opinion, you would want a system like what the brief max tension system is for me. It's a lot more aggressive. So you don't need to worry about rotation and all these volume and all these different things because you're just never going to have kids long enough for enough time to worry about training them like an advanced level lifter. Okay. And so that's why I wish one thing that people would become detached to is trying to train them for 10 or 20 years from now. Like you guys are worried about the wrong thing. Okay. What can you do now to get them where they need to go? Because ultimately you're never going to have enough time for them to have any real control over what happens in 10 years from now. You're just not going to have enough time. Okay. And so that's kind of something I would leave you with is evaluate, am I getting the most out of them now? Am I giving them the best opportunity to advance the fastest? Because inevitably there's going to be a time where they're not going to be as consistent. Something's going to happen and you're going to have to play catch up eventually. Okay. Half of being a strength coach is playing catch up for kids that go away for a season, go away for school. Half of my time is spent playing catch up with kids. Okay. So again, keep that in mind. But that's kind of how I use max effort or how I would use max effort, as well as kind of some background on the max effort method, how I originally used it. I didn't really want to get too much in the weeds as far as like stimulating reps and that type of stuff goes. I feel like I do some of that stuff a bit more, and I could make an episode about that if you guys want that. But again, this is what I would be doing personally. This is kind of where that transition from max effort to brief max retention kind of came from. So hopefully you enjoyed that and you had maybe a few takeaways from that. If you have some additional questions, things I didn't answer or something on here, shoot me a DM on either Twitter or Instagram. Okay, I'm pretty good about getting back to people. But that is all I have. Thank you for listening.